Hello and welcome to Entrepreneur Empowered. I'm your host, Attorney Sid Pedinti. You are now tuned into Bashani Radio, iHeartRadio Worldwide. I welcome you here today. In today's episode, I want to help you understand whether or not you are heading towards financial trouble, whether you have a situation that may require bankruptcy, that may require restructuring of your finances, or possibly even approaching your creditors to make a settlement, to make a reduction, to eliminate your debt so that you can move forward with confidence, you can move forward without excessive debts, and you can move on to the next phase of your life or your business knowing that your credit is secure, knowing that your debts are under control, and knowing that you're taking action so that you can avoid surprises and as well as any kind of further emergencies later on, disasters, right? Emergencies and disasters. So, in today's brief radio show, as well as if you're watching us online in today's video, I'm going to walk you through the different step by step systems that go into analyzing how you can figure out whether you are in fact headed towards financial trouble. Let me go ahead and give you a little bit background into what the situation is. The first question you want to ask yourself is, hey, am I in debt? Right? Are you in debt? So, my name is Sid Pedinti. I'm an attorney from California. I have a law practice which specializes in business, intellectual property, and as well as business and personal financial restructuring and bankruptcy in Los Angeles. We're located on the Pacific Coast Highway in beautiful Manhattan Beach, California. Now, prior to me moving to California, I'm originally from Toronto, and in Toronto since 2006, my team and I have been managing one of the busiest bankruptcy and restructuring practices. And so the foundation of my law firm now, which specializes and focuses on business, intellectual property, as well as business building, actually stems from the other complete end of the spectrum, right? From the complete different side, where I used to help people tank their businesses. I used to help them file bankruptcy. I used to help them get out of sticky situations that they found themselves in. So the knowledge and the information and some of the strategies I'm going to share with you today are a direct insight into some of the strategies we used to use internally to analyze whether or not somebody could file bankruptcy, whether they could eliminate debts by calling their creditors, or maybe going through a more formalized payment plan sort of program. Now, in Canada, the two options that people have are called bankruptcy and consumer proposal. In the US, these are Chapter 7 bankruptcy and Chapter 13 restructuring plan, right? A restructuring plan. In Toronto or Canada, as well as in the US, a restructuring payment plan involves, number one, paying back a certain portion of your debts, or if you have a lot of assets, in that case, perhaps paying back a significant portion of your debts, or maybe all of your debts, but in a more structured, streamlined, organized, and controllable fashion, where there's no interest, where there's rights afforded to you, where there's protection from the government from in both these countries, helping you get out of debt, and at the same time protect what you already have. So I'm talking about your assets, I'm talking about your wages, I'm talking about business and other things. So those are the strategies I intend to share with you today. So let's start with the basics. What is bankruptcy, right? What is a consumer proposal? What is a Chapter 13 restructuring plan? Who is it for? Is it for you? Is it for your spouse? Is it something that you can file jointly? Is it for a business situation? And the third thing I'm going to explore is how this process works and how you can benefit from this if you understand the basics. So today I want to give you sort of like a self-check guide. And so, if you're listening to this, if you have the capacity to pull up a piece of paper and a pen, go ahead and take some notes. This is about you, this is about your business, this is about your personal finances. You want to put yourself in a situation where you have complete control of what's happening, you have understanding of what's happening, and it's almost like a self checklist, right? So that you can keep track of what's happening behind the scenes. So, number one, the core focus in this presentation is going to be about liabilities, about the debts, right? So, the first thing you want to do is understand what total debt you owe. And here I'm talking about unsecured debt. So, credit cards, loans, personal lines of credit, medical bills, bills that are owed to somebody else, anything that's in your particular name. Now, these can be joint or they can be just in your name itself, right? The second thing you want to talk about or think about and list down is the total secured debts that you owe. So here we're talking about a car if it's financed or leased, as well as a property, right? A mortgage. If you have a mortgage, then that's a secure debt. Keep in mind that generally in bankruptcy and repayment program plans, your secured debts are going to be in your possession. You'll retain control over these assets that you're trying to build. And, on one side it's an asset, on the other side it is a debt. It is a liability that you still owe to the bank or to the party that's giving you the mortgage, right? So, those for the most part, you want to keep payments unless you plan to give it up. You want to keep regularized payments and not miss those. I will also want you to think about the total joint debts that you may possess, right? So here, if you have a card with your spouse's name on it, even if it's a supplemental card or a duplicate card that they can use and it's your primary account, keep in mind the banks have the legal right to go after that person, not for a portion of the debt, but the complete debt, right? The full debt amount. So if you have some joint debts with your spouse or your partner or with somebody else, think about those, right? Think about the liability you bring and the exposure to liability that you're putting the other person in. And especially if you're in a situation where you start to miss payments, keep in mind the banks and creditors can go after that person for the complete amount of the debt. So here's a little thing that you may not have known, a little tidbit. The bank can recover technically and legally two separate amounts from you and your spouse for the entire sum. Okay, let's say you go bankrupt, or let's say you have a card, you stop paying it, and now debts are racking up. The creditor can sue you, and the same thing for your spouse. Also want you to think about the lawsuits and the garnishments that you already may have or that are brewing in the process that you may not know about. So if you have any missed payments, think about these particular lawsuits, garnishment, wage collection letters that you may have, court orders that you may have. These are things you want to have a clear understanding of so you can take affirmative action and not be caught in a situation later on where it's a big surprise to you. I guarantee you that's going to cause a lot of stress. The second core focus I want you to think about today as we're exploring this is your total assets. If you have a car, if you have a house, if you have a business, if you have other quote unquote assets, investments, right, securities that you possess, I want you to think about what they're worth, right? What would you get for it in a present market, fair market value situation if you were to sell those assets? So think about that. So here, again, if you own a property, think about a fair value of the property. Not an unrealistic number, but a realistic number. And some of the things you can do is go online, check out properties that are being sold in the area. So yeah, and that's a good way to ascertain what the value of your property may be. The other thing I want you to think about is your personal property, right? Personal effects, as they're called. Here we're talking about your furniture, your jewelry, your cash, all the different things that you possess in your home. These are all called personal effects. So think of a number, and what realistic number in a garage sale value, what these would be. Again, when I talk about real property, which is the next one, here I'm talking about your main home. If you have any business property, so intellectual property, any patents, any particular codes, any particular investments in the business, these are all things you want to think about. Especially as entrepreneurs, where we're building all these assets, right? We keep building, building, building. Well, what's all this worth, right? If anything. So think about that, because that goes into your net value, into your net worth. I also want you to pay close attention to your income and expenses. How much money are you bringing in every single month, and how much expenses do you have? At the end of the day, and at the end of every month or every week, are you breaking even? Are you saving any money? So green for saving money, orange for break even, status quo, you're just floating by, or are you in the red where you're falling short every month? These are things you want to think about. Again, the other thing also you may want to consider and write down is who owns these properties, who owns these assets, who owns these investments. Is it you, or is it your spouse as well, or is it with some other partner? Now, keep in mind, most states, and even in Canada, most provinces have community community property laws, right? Which mean that if you're married for a certain amount of time, all the property that has been acquired after you get married, right, goes as community property. These are both parties, both spouses have a claim on these properties. So think about that, right? You may be the only person on the house listed, but if you don't have a prenuptial agreement in place, if you don't have particular um, contracts or particular terms drafted ahead of time that dictate the sole owner is a person on the property, then generally these are community properties once you get married. So look into the specific state you live in, what the laws are regarding community property, and that will give you an understanding of who can legally own those properties and how much they're worth. And in the event of a bankruptcy, liquidation, or auction, or whatever it is, seizure, what your portion is, right, compared to what the total portion is. So, husband and wife, and a property that has 500,000, that's worth $500,000, with no mortgage left. So let's assume that it's completely paid off. Then it's $250, 250,000 each is technically what each person owns in that property, right? That they can leverage. The third focus in this particular presentation, as we're walking through this, is thinking about the rules for your case. I want you to consider all the different avenues, all the different specific rules that apply to your case, right? And here's where things can get really complicated. Now, as we mentioned earlier, the first thing, as a quick recap before I dig into this actually, the first thing is to understand on one side what amount of debt and what amount of liabilities you owe. So making a list of all the different banks, all the different credit cards, all the different parties that you owe money to, including medical, personal, lines of credit, and anything else. So list that down, add it up. What is the total amount? The next, we talked about joint debts. So what portion of this could be a joint debt? The third thing I talked about is the different assets that you own, right? Your net worth, so different investments that you contain, you possess, and what the value of those things are. So we talked about liabilities and we talked about assets. And so it's a matching game, right? What is the total liability that you owe? So total debt that you owe. And what is the total assets? What is your net worth? Now, generally, if your assets, all your assets put together, are worth way more than the liabilities that you owe, chances are that you may be forced to pay back your entire amount what you owe. So let's assume in a situation that you have $100,000 of equity in your property or cash in the bank or whatever, and you owe $20,000 in credit card bills. Now, you're in a situation where you're not able to pay the credit card bills because of the high interest minimum payments, and you're looking for a way to consolidate some of the assets that you already possess so that you can pay some of your debts off. However, you find or you may feel that, hey, why don't I try and negotiate with my creditor so I don't have to touch assets, so I don't have to liquidate them, right? That may be an option. Well, in that situation, you may be in fact forced to pay back $20,000 that you owe because you already have on one side assets that are worth way more than that. So you have the option of liquidating some of your assets to pay back debts, right? And so that mentality applies, and most courts, most trustees, most bankruptcy attorneys will probably look into that because that's what the court wants to understand. If you have assets worth more than your debts, plain and simple, liquidate your assets or pay back the full portion of your debts. Now there are advantages, of course, of going through a legal avenue, such as a bankruptcy or a repayment plan, which is that there are no interest rates, right? All interest freezes. The amount that you owe stops. It gets it doesn't keep going on and on. So at least you know now what amount you owe and how you can pay back. You have a more dedicated game plan that you can sort of follow. So think about that in your business, right? Think about how important that is to be able to plan ahead so that you can pay off debts, you can move forward, and most importantly, you can have some peace of mind knowing that you're taking the right step. So in terms of exceptions, there's exemptions, and there's reviewable transactions. So there's some exceptions to what sort of debts cannot go in as part of a bankruptcy or a proposal or a settlement. Number one, we're talking about things that are owed to childcare, for example, right? Child custody payments, or some of the payments for fraudulent accounts and whatnot. Generally, you cannot get rid of these. In terms of exemptions, when I talk about exemption, I'm talking about what you can keep, right? Legally keep, so that it's not forced into a liquidation setting. It's not seized by a creditor or a trustee or a bankruptcy attorney or a court, so that they're paying off debts. So exemptions, there are certain, like pension plans. In Canada, it's called retirement, RRSP, retirement registered retirement savings plans, like your 401ks in the U.S. These are all situations. These are all investments, assets that you can legally retain in some of these situations as you're paying back debts, right? There's something also called a reviewable transaction. So this is another thing you want to think about. In the last, let's say, 6 months, have you made any purchases? Have you made any transfers of payments knowing or anticipating that you're not able to pay back? So let's say you went and bought $1,000 TV and you know that you cannot pay back, with the intention of perhaps filing bankruptcy later on. Now, keep in mind, that's a reviewable transaction. It smells funny, it looks funny, possibly is funny, right? And that's exactly what the court's going to look at. Is something, is a particular transaction something we can look into further? Can we mitigate the risk? Can we predict what this person is thinking and what they want to do, right? These are some of the things you want to really think about so that you're not caught again at a situation where you have to pay back those things or a court comes and repossesses some of those things. So I want you to match up your assets versus your liabilities. Okay? So once you've done that, that's the quick self-check. So number one, hopefully you have the total amount of debt that you owe, right? Personal, unsecured debt, as well as personal, secure debts. The second thing hopefully you have by now is a total valuation of what your net worth is. This is a combination of what your property is worth minus what mortgage is owed. So for example, if you are living in a $500,000 property and you owe $200,000 to the bank, Now it's clear that 300,000 is the quote unquote equity interest that you possess in that property. Now, whether or not you can actually get $300,000 in cash in a situation it is a bit different, and that's a different scenario altogether, because now you're talking about getting fees, paying different parties who help you in that process. So, out of the 300,000, you may only end up getting 250,000 or 200,000, right? So always keep some of those things and give some a little bit of leeway. In other words, these numbers are just approximates. They don't have to be the exact dollar value. So we talked about three numbers: your total unsecured debt, total secured debt, and total assets that you right now possess. So what are your options? What can you do, right, if you're in a situation where you find yourself falling behind? Number one, you have the option of filing, if you're in the US, a Chapter 7 personal bankruptcy. In Canada, this is a consumer bankruptcy. Now, again, the rules are very similar. There's some differences, of course, but keep in mind, the information I'm giving you is more of a self-check than an actual legal consultation. So don't take it literally. You obviously have to refer back to an expert in your area to make sure that these are all compliant. But generally, a bankruptcy may be an option, right? In the US, a bankruptcy lasts generally 3 to 6 months. In Canada, it's up to 9 months. In both countries, based on reviewable transactions, or if there's any fraud involved, or if there's any shady, funny business going on, your bankruptcy may be extended. The court may request to dig into your file a bit further. The trustee may force you to give you records and evidence that there's no fraud involved. So, in other words, the burden may shift on you in the event that there's something funny happening, there's something shady happening behind the scenes in your bankruptcy file. So always be careful, about how you conduct business, how you conduct transactions, and what you want to do. Okay, so personal bankruptcy may be an option. The second thing is a payment plan. In the US, it's called a Chapter 13. It's a wage earners payment plan where you're paying back a portion or a significant portion of your debts. In Canada, this process is called the consumer proposal. Of course, there's another one called a Division 1 business proposal where majority of the debts are due to a business related expense or they have a dollar value, right? A high dollar value. In those situations, again, the court and the creditors and the other parties have a right to review some of these things to understand where the money's owed, and if you have a revenue, if you have consistent income coming in, then why did you end up in that situation, right? So think about those things. If you think, hey, let's pay back a significant portion or a portion of my debts, is that an option? Yes, absolutely. If you have a business in both countries, you can file a corporate a bankruptcy as well, right? Or a corporate restructuring plan. In the US, this is a Chapter 11. In Canada, this is filed under what is the creditor, what is it called? A creditor repayment plan, right? So it's a business bankruptcy. The filing is different. Again, but keep in mind, both countries, generally, you have to have a significant amount of debt that you owe, millions and millions of dollars. So if you're an individual owning a business, and you have a certain portion of debts, personal debts that you use for the business, these are not corporate bankruptcies. I'm talking about franchises. I'm talking about huge companies in both countries. To do a corporate bankruptcy, you're talking tens of thousands of legal fees, right? Tens of thousands of dollars what it's going to cost you. So these are huge situations like franchises, the Lehman Brothers, and GM going bankrupt. These are huge companies, enterprises that this particular option is sort of reserved for. Are there any special arrangements that you can make, right? So think about that. Well, there's a non-legal option as well of how you can get out of debt, and that's to liquidate some of your assets. All right? You don't have to file bankruptcy. Nobody's forcing you. You don't have to go for a consumer proposal and pay back a monthly payments to creditors. You can, if you have assets, you can liquidate them and pay them off. So, do you qualify? Let's talk about that. And what are the qualifications, right? Who is it for? We talked about that. What is it? We talked about that. How is it done? Right? And that's where we are right now. The how. So number one, you want to understand the total debt amount. In both countries, there is some, indication of what amounts of debts you need to have in the event that you're considering both of these options. Also, think about the total assets that you possess right now, your net worth. As I mentioned earlier, where you have assets that are significantly higher in value than the total debt that you owe, then chances are you may not qualify for bankruptcy and you may in fact be forced into a wage earners payment plan, right? Or a consumer proposal, as it's called in Canada. Again, this is a situation where you essentially have assets. You have money coming in. You contain and possess properties that have some sort of value, and you're trying to understand how you can pay back a portion of your debt or all of your debt, right, that is still owed, unsecured debt, by tapping into the assets or without tapping into assets. But the personal asset situation, the total dollar value makes a big difference whether or not you qualify for bankruptcy. There's also very specific income requirements in both countries where if you earn a certain portion of income, right, and based on your household, family structure and dynamics and demographics and the number of dependents on you, you may in fact be forced into one or the other once again. And it applies both in Canada and the US, right? So let's say you're earning 100,000 or 200,000 a year as a single person with high debt load for some reason, you may not be able to do a bankruptcy. You may be forced into a wage earners plan, right? Or maybe the court will reject all of it and say, hey, go back and pay your debts the normal way. So these are all specific situations that apply in both countries. Let's talk about the benefits. I've talked about all these negative things and things that affect you in a negative way, that bring stress, that keep you up at night, high debts and all this stuff. Look, the reason bankruptcy and consumer proposal and Chapter 13 wage earner protection plans have been created by the government, right, by individuals like us who are drafting these papers somewhere in the government, is so that you can afford some benefits. This is a way to move forward. Number one, there is absolutely no interest in either country when you go for these options, whether it's a bankruptcy or a consumer proposal or a Chapter 13 repayment plan. All of your all of your interest freezes. It's 0%. Think about the total debt that you owe. And if you're paying minimum payments every month, and you take a look at your credit card statements, it will tell you what portion of the payment went directly towards interest. Imagine if you had zero interest on your debts right now, and they freeze wherever they are. And if there was never any interest, what would that amount have been, right? Obviously much lower. So this is something you want to think about seriously and consider seriously, because if you're in a tough position and you're looking to move forward, you're looking to pay off debts, you're looking to become debt-free, the first step is to freeze interest so that on one end you're trying to pay it off, on the other end it doesn't keep rising, right? It doesn't keep increasing with interest. Number two, you are afforded legal protection in both countries. I'm talking about protection from creditors. I'm talking about protection from seizure of assets. I'm talking about somebody coming in, the sheriff or somebody else knocking door, barging in, taking away a couch or a TV or whatever. There's legal protection. There's a specific process in place now that they have to comply with. The creditors, just like you, have specific rules and regulations in these situations. The creditors also have to comply with rules and regulations. And so your legal protection covers yourself, your dependents, it covers your bank accounts, it covers your wages, it covers your business, it covers the assets that you already possess. Number three, it controls the total debt load. All right, so there's a chance that it can decrease it, or there's a chance if you have more assets than liabilities, then how about freezing what debt you owe, right? Instead of where you're paying minimum payments, you know that every month your amount keeps increasing and increasing and increasing. So what about freezing it so that you can have a chance to catch up? The other advantage is that there's smaller monthly payments, whether it's a bankruptcy situation or a repayment program. Uh, Here I'm talking more specifically about a repayment program where you have no interest and all of a sudden your debt load seems manageable, right? So there's smaller monthly payments that are more flexible, that are afforded to you. The advantage of this is that there's no more calls from creditors. Nobody's going to harass you anymore. Nobody's going to be bothering you every month to pay bills. There's no more lawsuits if there's any existing lawsuits in place, or garnishment orders, or creditors or collection people after you. If there's lawyers after you from the creditors, their action stops. Okay? So all that stops. At the end of the day, entrepreneurs, look, we need peace of mind. And that's what the bankruptcy and repayment plans have been designed for. Giving people the peace of mind that they deserve, knowing that there's a way out of debt, that there's a situation, there are circumstances, there are legal avenues that they can engage with, that they can employ, that they can take advantages of, so that they can get the peace of mind they deserve, knowing on one side your debts are going down, on the other side your assets are protected. That's major. There is light at the end of the tunnel, in other words. Okay? So the other advantage to this whole process is that you have a chance to rebuild your credit. If you're talking about rebuilding credit, you obviously know, or you may not know this, but credit is based on many things. Number one is the total amount of debt that you owe and how frequent you're able to pay those debts. So, there's a lot of clients who have walked into my office, thousands of clients who have walked into my office over the years who have excellent credit, right? The highest possible credits, over 700, over close to 800, who, one side, they have excellent credit. On the other side, they owe a ton of money, right? So, is there a point doing that? Maybe, maybe not. Every situation is different. But what you want to think about is rebuilding credit after eliminating debt. And this process, the bankruptcy process, the consumer proposal process, the repayment plan process, allows you to focus on rebuilding your credit without debts, right? That's the major kicker. So your assets are safe, your liability is greatly reduced, and you have some help legally to help reestablish yourself. So who are we? Why do people like me exist? It's so that we can help you put together a program, put together plans, put together a strategic way of going about this whole thing, so that your assets are protected. In Toronto, my bankruptcy practice is one where we represent you, called the debtor. I hate that word, the debtor, somebody in debt. But for legal purposes, I guess it's clear. There's one person who gives a credit, the creditor, the other person who has the debt, the debtor. All right? Our job is to help you. Bankruptcy attorneys, our job is to help you. Consumer proposal experts, credit restructuring gurus. Our job is to intervene in the process, help you evaluate these debts, help you understand what your assets are worth, and restructure your business and your personal finances in a way so that your assets are safe, your payments are going according to plan, and everything is protected, right? Your interests are completely protected. The other good thing about this process is that, or engaging or working with somebody in this process is that they can generally help you deal with creditors. It is not easy dealing with creditors or court officers or even lawyers, right? Or judges. And what we do is intervene in that process to help you make this process smooth as possible so that you have somebody representing you, whether it's in somebody's office or in court, helping you make the right moves. So, no more debts. Okay? That's the key that I want to share this week with you. Think about your personal life, think about your business life, and if you have some sort of debt, I want you to tell yourself, repeat this to yourself over and over and over again. When you get up in the morning, tell yourself this. Today, I'm going to find a way to get out of debt. This week, the avenues that are going to help me get out of debt are going to come my way. These are the avenues that are going to help me secure, safeguard, protect my assets, my peace of mind, my job, right? My investments, my family. These are the things that I'm able to do. It's very important to have a mental game plan before doing anything on paper or anywhere else. You want to understand how to get out of these situations mentally. So hopefully a lot of this process made sense to you, and have and got you thinking about your personal situation, or maybe a friend or a family member who may be in this situation where they're just racking on credit card and unsecured debt with high interest, and on one side they're losing their peace of mind. What I've designed is a simple application form for you to fill out. We'll give you 100% free complimentary assessment to help you understand whether or not you are headed towards financial trouble, right? Where are you in this process? I'll give you a free 15-minute consultation. If you're in Canada, I welcome you to go to Clear Debt Solutions. That's the name of my company, cleardebtsol.com. And if you are in the US, I practice only in California, but that said, I have a lot of friends in the New York, Florida, Washington area who can possibly help you if you are, in fact, in a situation where you're considering perhaps filing for bankruptcy, or seeking some sort of debt assistance to eliminate what you already owe. I welcome you to go to California Law Services and book an appointment with me, right? Fill out a form and let me analyze the situation. I'll be more than happy to do that and point you in the right direction to one of our partners who may be able to help you in the local area, wherever you're from. But the point of this whole thing is that you need to take affirmative action, right? Nothing's going to go away by itself. Debt does not disappear. Let me tell you that. And I assure you that after having worked with thousands of people, over 5,000 people in the last 12 years, and helping them reduce or eliminate over almost $500 million worth of debt, I can tell you that interest and debts do not go away by themselves. You have to take the first step to take affirmative action towards eliminating this stuff. Let me share a little secret with you. About 14 years ago, I declared bankruptcy. It was a personal and a business bankruptcy, a situation we were forced into by a creditor, somebody who we were leasing equipment from, who went bankrupt, and they forced us into bankruptcy by seizing this equipment. And had we known these things, had we taken affirmative action, had we been prepared, had we had the contracts in place, if we had the different mindset and options available, right? Number one is a mindset, knowing that, hey, I got to be more informed. We were ignorant about this. We never thought about it, right? And later it came back and bit us in the back. So what the reason I'm sharing this with you and what I encourage you to do is to take positive action towards your own financial situation, because if you don't do it, nobody else is going to do it. Okay, so hopefully this week's Entrepreneur Empowered show about your personal finances has given you a little bit of insight into your situation and whether or not it's something that you need to think about seriously, right? In order to move forward, sometimes you need to step back, and that's what and slow things down, and that's exactly what these processes are designed to do. Freeze interest, stop interest, so you have a chance to catch up before moving forward. Entrepreneurs, I thank you for tuning in this week. If you have any questions on some of the strategies I discussed here about debt reduction, about bankruptcy, about asset protection, feel free to reach out to me. Our Facebook page, is my Sid Pedinti, Peddinti. I welcome you to go like it and send me a quick message with what you're looking for. You can even go to California Law Services on Facebook, send me a quick message saying, hey, I heard your show. I wanted to get more information. I need some help. And I'll be more than happy to point you in the right direction. Once again, entrepreneurs, that's it for the show today. We covered a lot of very important and critical topics. And I hope you take the time this week to note down and to write down your action plan, your financial plan, especially if you're in debt, how you're going to get out of it. And as I walk you through this, let me go with a quick recap before I end the show. Number one, put together your entire liabilities, all the debts that you owe, unsecured debts. And if you don't know what they are, pull up your credit report. It probably has all this stuff. Number two, write down the total assets, how much assets you have. Put down a dollar value. Number three, think about any shady, reviewable, or not straightforward transactions that you've been engaged in over the last year. Yeah, and if it's a property, for example, if you transfer a property anticipating some of your creditors are going to come get you, and you did this in the last year or two, transferred the property off to somebody else, or even sold it for peanuts, right, for a couple of dollars. And I say that because I've seen these transactions for $1, property worth $1 million. Well, no kidding. The banks are not going to be happy about that. The creditors are not going to be happy. The court is not going to be happy. You have the money, you just don't want to pay them, right? So there's being honest about it goes a long way, but at the same time being strategic about it, right? So that's kind of what this whole thing is about. So write down the dollar value, understand who may sue you or who's suing you, and figure out what you need to do. So that's it for today's show. I welcome you to reach out to me if you have any questions. Thank you for joining us. Once again, this is attorney Sid Pedinti, and you are now tuned into Entrepreneur Empowered. That's it for this week. I will catch you next week at the same time, same place. Bye-bye.